Finally, your vacation has arrived, and it's completely fine that you didn't book a hotel that accepts pets. Your beloved dog will be fine staying home with a random dog sitter. What's your dog ever done for you? Let you be the big spoon? Doesn't say anything about the shocking amount of selfies you take at home. Oh, your favorite pets. Wow, he ate them whole. When a vacation from your pets isn't an option, it matters where you stay. At Hilton, we offer pet-friendly accommodations. Hilton, for the stay.
Listeners of the Mad Scientist podcast, have I got a deal for you? If you follow the social media of the show, you know that I'm a pretty hairy dude, which is why I was really excited when Manscaped reached out and offered to send us some free goodies to see if we wanted to promote it to you all. I've got to say, right now, this is probably one of the best products I have ever bought for myself. Not only is it waterproof, but it also makes sure that you don't get any nicks or things in areas that you probably don't want guts, to be frank. That's why I'm so happy to say that support for the Mad Scientist podcast is brought to you by Manscaped, who is the best in men's below-the-waist grooming. Their products are precision-engineered tools for your family jewels. Manscaped's Performance Package is the ultimate in men's hygiene bundles. Join over 6 million men worldwide who trust Manscaped with its exclusive offer for you. 20% off and free worldwide shipping with the code MADSCIENCE. That's MADSCIENCE at manscaped.com. If my math is correct, that's about 12 million balls. What a great time! Again, get 20% off and free shipping with the code MADSCIENCE at manscaped.com. That's 20% off with free shipping at manscaped.com using the code MADSCIENCE. Unlock your confidence and always use the right tools for the job with Manscaped. The famine is a punishment from God for an idle, ungrateful, and rebellious country, an indolent and unself-reliant people. The Irish are suffering from an affliction of God's providence. Charles Trevelyan, again, the guy in charge of famine relief. What the fuck?
Seems nice. He seems nice.
I just don't.
It's the empathy that you look for with your leadership, really. That they understand people and sympathize with their needs.
I don't understand. What an asshole. All right, Jake, roll the tape. So, dear listeners, at the end of the last episode, the Corn Laws had finally been repealed, and the relief commissions created by the Peel government's Central Relief Commission had begun to administer some local help to communities greatly affected by the potato blight. The way these relief commissions worked is of importance here, and it's a little bit like nitty-gritty. It seems, again, like we said in the last episode, it seems kind of like, who gives a shit about all this, like, bureaucracy setup that you created? But like, the English care. They care a lot, right? Mm-hmm. This is the 5 mile queue, but made just to the insanest degree.
Yeah, it's now down to like 3 miles too.
Thank God.
I'm just joking.
So part of what made the relief efforts so completely ineffectual were what were known as the Irish Poor Laws, right? These are the laws that really made things a huge sticking point. And these laws were on the books for a long time, and they're modeled after British Poor Laws. Mm-hmm. But basically, it's a method of government relief, like a setup system where the government decides, okay, this is how relief can be given to the poor. And so, essentially, what they did, they broke up the country into what were called poor law unions, which were areas of local governments which were responsible for providing relief to their own poor through the collection of taxes and like charitable stuff and whatever. So these individual poor law unions were responsible for basically creating like almshouses, workhouses is what they were called, where the poor could come and basically like work and live in these poorhouses for enough money or for food and clothing and whatever. Does that make sense?
It does. And already out of the gate, I sense issues. I see
Yeah,
issues.
you can already see some issues, right?
Really quickly, a question. So who was donating? Like you said that they were, that these individual unions were accepting donations. Like who would be donating?
So it's interesting.
Do you think that was a real thing?
Yeah, no, it was. That was like most of how they got their money actually was through donations. So the Queen would on a couple of occasions put out like the royalty, basically the crown would put out these calls for donations, right? To say like, come on, you need to help your countrymen, donate. Yeah.
Yeah. So volunteering, I'm
it was volunteerism essentially.
Okay.
But that only really worked in the beginning when people weren't super against the Irish. It only worked in the beginning when so these are like rich aristocrats in the UK, throughout the UK, right, that are donating and helping. And actually quite a bit towards the end also comes from like America too, when people are in America and they're sending money back. So the law
that makes sense.
The law originally is passed in 1838. And again, it existed throughout the UK, these what were called poor laws. The main issue in Ireland was the depth of the dependence on a crop that had completely failed, right? They were on a single crop, and the sheer, like, just by percentage, the amount of indentured cottiers and poor farmers to landowning rich aristocrats. So there wasn't like a middle class of people who could help sort of almost like bear some of the burden either way. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Well, if you don't have a middle class, if you have very, very poor and very, very rich, you have no mobility.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right. And it's also showing the stagnation of your economy.
Yeah, absolutely. So the Peel government believed correctly, frankly, that the poor law houses, these workhouses, would not possibly be able to handle the influx of the starving and poor caused by the famine. And so the Peel government created a Central Relief Commission, which would also help with the poorhouse work and provide like emergency relief that didn't have to go through this poor law union system. And
which is basically everything at that point.
Exactly. So they created like the food depots where grain was sold at cost to the public. They were the ones that created the public works programs. They were the ones that were like importing corn from other countries, everything else. Yeah. That relief commission is what Trevelyan is in charge of, by the way. The guy that said the Irish deserve this because God was punishing them. And so the central issue, though, is that, again, the funding for this relief came from monies collected mostly through charitable donations of the aristocracy or basically like selling of government loans almost. Right. So the poor law union in an area would say, hey, we're really struggling. We need a lot of help. And the government would say, OK, well, we'll give you an interest-free loan for 10 years. Right. Like, don't worry about it. And again, like further issues here, right? So the stuff that they were bringing in, the food to help the poor, they were bringing in corn, which no one knew how to eat. So there was also like an added thing where Peel like tried to basically create a public information campaign to teach the Irish how to eat corn and millet and everything. So like it's adding complexity upon complexity upon complexity. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so again, it's just crazy. So things are falling apart for Peel. Yeah, things are falling apart for Peel.
Well, yeah.
And so, but interestingly, his efforts are considered to be like the Peel government's efforts are considered to be probably the most successful of the government responses to the famine. They weren't perfect, of course. I mean, loads of people starved and died. And it just, again, like we're talking about relief here. The relief is not enough. This is like you're going from starving quickly to starving slowly over a matter of months.
Well, yeah. And you have, like we've hit on the prior episodes, you have this perfect storm where you've gutted their entire infrastructure.
Absolutely.
Right? There is no infrastructure. There is nothing that would have any kind of a cushion effect with any of this, or that they could even leverage or count on to be able to build off of with any of this relief effort. It's like the hole they're in is so deep now that it would take much more of an effort, started much earlier than they recognized it. Yeah. But I mean, I guess it's cold comfort, right? That Peel did something.
Well, it's interesting. The Peel's efforts are looked at today as like, yeah, there's a raging forest fire and you throw a single bucket of water on it.
Yeah.
Right. They're more generous than what Trevelyan and the Russell government would do, which is like adding kindling, but it's still not up to the task. So we ended last episode with, the Peel government actually ended up being able to repeal the Corn Laws, which again were those laws that set, basically they were like protectionist policies in place to protect the interests of British, well, UK, I should say, growers of wheat and grains. So repeal the Corn Law, and then the infighting that happened in the Tory government that was Peel's party led to his ouster. And the replacement of Peel was the Lord John Russell, a Whig and laissez-faire capitalist fucking psychopath.
Oh, thank God. I really feel like a return to
normalcy.
A return to normalcy with laissez-faire is always what the culture needs.
So interestingly, like Russell is considered maybe the least. There's a couple of people like Charles Wood, Russell. They're looked at a little bit less. They're evil, but they're looked at as almost like not as evil as like Trevelyan is thought of almost as like Scar, right? And then like Wood, and at least as far as I can tell, right, like George Grey and Russell, they're almost kind of looked at as like the hyenas from The Lion King. You know,
right.
like one of them's kind of
nice
funny.
analogy.
Every once in a while, he's like, "Wait, should we do this?" And then Trevelyan's like, "No, idiot," and like bonks him over the head. You know what I mean? It'd be hilarious if there wasn't millions of people dying and starving. So
yes. Nice Disneyfication of it, though.
yeah. The Russell government taking over put the emphasis on three central figures. So the head of the Treasury, who's Charles Trevelyan, who's already been in place under Peel, the Chancellor of the Exchequer, Charles Wood, and then the Home Secretary for Ireland, George Grey. These three adhered to what was known as the moralist viewpoint of capitalism. So they thought that the poor were poor because they were bad people. So the poor are poor and not able to function in a capitalist society, not because, as Adam Smith himself said, there's just always going to be poverty, right? And it has nothing to do with their morals. It's just a systemic problem that, you know, happens with any kind of market economy. They thought, no, these people are not able to function in a capitalist society because they're morally repugnant. They're bad people, and we need to kill them. We need to get rid of them, right? We need to beat the good into them, starve the good into them.
That's amazing.
Yeah. So the famine, like this is where we get the craziest quotes about the famine from the government. You know, they say the famine is basically a good thing, right? It's a pestilence brought by God, who is angry at the Irish to show them the error of their ways.
Yeah, the error of their ways, which has been, you know, having to support
the entire British
in their government
right,
for decades upon decades upon decades without any kind of voice or identity or profit or anything. Yeah, that's
the problem.
That's the problem. Well, you know, that is the problem, right? It's just I think they're pointing the wrong finger, though.
So
at the wrong person.
When Peel was in charge, Trevelyan's worst impulses were at least stymied,
right.
You know, but like Trevelyan, he's one of those chief people who is like, we shouldn't buy corn to import. We shouldn't do any of this stuff to help them. Like this should be their own problem to figure out. So the Russell government takes over in 1846. And by that time that they take over, they still weren't sure if like, did the blight go away? Was it coming back? Right. Because they didn't know enough about biology really to tell either way.
Yeah.
But they knew enough about biology to say, hey, all the potatoes are rotten. This is going to be bad.
It seems like God still hates them.
So 1845.
It couldn't be biology.
If you remember, in the last episode, the 1845 crop, the first crop of the famine, it was like a 50% loss of the potato, right? 1846, almost the entire potato crop fails. There's like not a single good potato left by midwinter.
Yeah.
Now, the Whig government coming in here, the Russell government, they came into power and thought, okay, first thing we do, we got a country that's starving. Marie, what do you think the first thing you do is?
Oh, you cut your losses.
Cut your losses and run.
If you're a conservative Whig,
Cut your losses
capitalist driven, cut your losses, cut them out.
Cut your losses.
They're the counselor. They're the reason that, we can't keep supporting them. We can't. And not only that, but if we support them and we fail, then we're the ones that will ultimately be blamed.
So the Whigs their basic plan is to try to remove any financial risk or burden on the government and instead shift all costs for poor relief onto the Irish aristocracy itself. Their basic argument is Irish property must pay for Irish poverty.
Ooh, well, that's sort of hypocritical.
A little bit, right? Because Irish property is paying for British profligacy, right?
And the British, the Irish landlords and landowners themselves are British.
Yeah, they're not like another country, right? They're part of the UK.
Oh, that's unfortunate. If only they were another country, it would have made things so much more neat.
So much easier to pretend like there weren't suffering people.
So much easier to be able to carry that hypocrisy.
So what they basically did was they said, okay, the poor laws, we're going to use the poor laws and the relief commission set up already, right, through the poor laws. Those are going to be the ones that are doing all of the relief at all. And the first thing they did was they said, okay, we are giving you a 10-year period to pay back any relief money that you request from here on out. Now, what did this do? You got to remember, the people who are giving the money to the poor law unions are the aristocracy. They are not making any money because none of their crops are growing.
Right.
All their workers are dying of starvation. So the landlords now, not that the landlords are like a sympathetic people here. They're a big villain in this too.
Oh, yeah.
But they're like, well, shit, if now the poor law unions have to pay back the government, we need to start collecting money from the people. Because, the only money they're getting now is in rent. So they start fighting to get back rent from the people who are starving to death in these little mud huts.
Who, again, like, what money do they have?
Exactly. There is no money.
Right?
Yeah, it's just
I think the thing that's so amazing about this is just you say it so plainly and you're just like, well, that makes absolutely no sense. These people didn't have any, like, you point out these problems and it makes sense. I'm just sort of curious as to how it was sold, year after year in the time, like with the communication that would make these property owners, be like, yeah, we can get it from them. We'll get it from them. It's not fair that they're asking us. We'll get it from them and be like, where do you see this? Where is that? How does that make sense?
We're going to get into this a little bit more. The view from London at the time was that the Irish were holding out.
Yes, because that's yeah.
They thought
they were hiding all of the gold under the bad potatoes.
They thought that the Irish aristocracy was holding out, and they thought that the Irish poor who were starving were not that badly off. Right there, like, again, we see this, not to get too political, right? Because God fucking forbid we
heaven forbid we learn from this.
Yeah, God forbid we use history to learn for the future. I'm not mad, Marie. You're mad.
No.
They believed that the main problem, they thought that the reason there wasn't enough money or food to help the starving was that there were two classes of poor people. The people who were really needing it and the people who were just taking advantage of too lax government relief.
Yeah. Because that government relief, that's been really, they've been living high on the hog, right?
So the Whigs' main governmental policy was to try and make sure That not a they would rather 1 million people starve than pay out a single extra payment to somebody who was undeserving of that help. Man. That is the sentiment here. So all of this government relief now, again, they've decided we're not doing this emergency relief commission shit anymore. Peel was too soft with the Irish. We're going back to the old ways. And so they went back to two main areas of public relief: the public's work programs and the poor law union workhouses. So let's get into these poor laws a little bit. So the Poor Law Relief Act of 1838 required that all relief in Ireland, so specifically for Ireland, be given as what was termed indoor relief in the union workhouses. So each center of population for an area had a workhouse, and indoor relief could be provided there, where local governors would ensure basically that the operation of the workhouse and collection of funds to provide for the poor, from the better off in the area, charitable donations, whatever. Indoor relief meant taking in those who were so destitute they had nowhere to live, giving them housing, food, clothing, and other care if they're sick or whatever, and taking away their property. So if you went to the poorhouse and you said, hey, I need help, they asked you how much land you have. And if you had more than basically like a half an acre, they said, well, you either have to give that land back to the landlord so he can maybe make some money, right, from it so that he can pay for this relief. Or if you own the land outright, you're going to give it to the government. Right? So obviously now these workhouses, they become breeding grounds for like every disease imaginable. Right. So the biggest ones at the time are, they call it famine fever. Not as fun as it sounds.
No.
Dysentery, smallpox, measles, tuberculosis, like everything terrible.
All the greatest hits.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So initially, again, the first couple of months, the workhouses look like they're going to be mildly successful, right? They're bringing in people, they're helping them, keeping them from starving, keeping them from freezing to death in the winter. But 1846 comes around, there's no food anywhere anymore. There's one workhouse for like every major city and like county, right? They're fucked. There's nothing. They're not gonna be able to help these people.
No, but the one, it's not good, I'm air quoting, but the one thing it did achieve was it's also reconsolidating the wealth and the land and the ownership of the land back to the UK.
So,
right. So yeah,
absolutely.
It's weakening. It's further weakening whatever roots Irish had for permanency.
Yeah.
And for building wealth over time. Right.
And that actually gets to be back to that question you had before, right? Like, what are the English thinking about these landlords? Like, how do they think they'll have any money to pay them back? Another thing they're saying is your entire economy just collapsed because you idiots keep planting just fucking potatoes. Why did you replant potatoes? Plant something else. What are you doing?
Which again is pretty myopic, considering
stupid as shit, right? Because again, they have seed potatoes, right? They don't have the infrastructure maybe to grow other things. They are growing other things, by the way. That's how they're making most of their money. The thing they seem to fail to recognize is the landlords maybe are growing wheat. None of that wheat is staying in Ireland to be fed to the people.
No,
right?
Anytime that they would be like, well, why didn't you grow something else? They did, and then the British took it.
Well, they would sell it to the British, right? The landlords would sell it. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's what I mean. There was nothing. That's
yeah. It's like an idiotic thing, right? It's like, why are you just eating potatoes? And the Irish poor are like, what the fuck else is there, right? Like, there's nothing else here for us to eat. So the public works projects somehow are even worse than the workhouses. So by early 1847. Over 20% of some of the most hard-hit counties, like County Clare, 20% of their population is supported by public works projects. And so the west and south of Ireland really bears the brunt of the famine, and they have the biggest need. But basically, like, during this time, about 10% of the public population of Ireland is on the public pay work system. And most of those works, like we said last time, they involve the creation of stone roads with no destination at all. So there's just like thousands of starving people breaking rocks, moving rocks down the road, placing them down. getting paid for the amount of rocks they broke and laid that day.
It's so futile.
And again,
Futile.
it's futile and it's futile. Right?
Yes, it's exactly
both.
Feudal and futile.
And
yes.
the problem, the things that are really going wrong, right? We just said there's no food to be purchased in Ireland at the time. Like there's no food, right? It's not like there's anything to buy. And because there's a lack of food in Ireland, there's no, the payment that these people are being given, it's not enough food to feed even a single person, let alone feed a family.
Right.
So being on the public works project, it's just basically delaying your starvation.
Right. And it's not even organizing a way to start building effective infrastructure.
No, it's just
they can't even put enough time and effort from sort of the central landowners or the central government to be able to affect that. It's
the plan is not to fix Ireland. The plan is to punish the Irish until they fix themselves.
Right. Which is what's so incredibly insane is that they also probably didn't have the means to effectively fix any of these problems.
No, there's nothing. There's no way they could have done it. So
of course not.
The winter of 46 to 47 is particularly bad in terms of weather for Ireland as well. So there's just blizzard after blizzard after blizzard. And so what does this do for the workhouses or for anyone in the workhouses or doing road relief? You don't get paid if you don't lay useless stones on dead roads. Right. So they're not getting paid for their daily work, and there's no food available anyways. So most of them, what they start doing is they start pawning off their belongings, including clothing, furniture, bedding, whatever. Right?
Yeah.
So again, if your government plan is we're not going to give the people fish, we're going to teach them to fish, does not work so well in a desert.
No.
There have to be fish available.
Right. Right.
So by January 1847, it becomes clear that these public works projects, they're not working. They're not working at all. The government has paid about £5 million for roads that don't go anywhere. And the Whig government is we could be spending this in more effective ways. And so they're not helping anybody. They're not doing anything. And so by June of 47, all public works projects are halted officially. It's considered a tremendous failure, even for the Whigs. They're this has not been working at all. But surprisingly for the Whigs, they do have one successful public relief method. They get it from the Quakers and the British Relief Association. And it is basically what becomes known as the Temporary Soup Kitchen Act of February 1847. Notice how they put temporary in the name.
Such a benign group of
Such a benign group. The idea with this law, basically, they're okay, look, people are starving, right? What's the cheapest food we can make? It's got to be soup.
Dirt.
It's between soup and
they
dirt.
Can't eat dirt. Right? Stones? Nope, can't eat stones.
Stones hasn't worked out so well for us.
No.
We're going to go with soup. They basically decided we're going to give people free soup in these soup kitchens, and the rich can pay to come watch the poor eat the soup.
Oh, good.
Yeah. It's
almost like a zoo of loathing.
It's crazy, right? It's kind of nuts. Yeah.
And what was the motivation for this? So you could either feel good about yourself as a British citizen because you're quote unquote helping them by feeding them, or you could just loathe them more because they're so poor and it's just such abject poverty that you've been conditioned to see as weakness. That's the thing that's so disgusting about it. It's so voyeuristic.
Well, so the other thing, the payment thing,
I mean, I'm really surprised they just didn't have them fight. They didn't just pay to have them fight at this point, like a Hunger Games.
Well, so the other thing that happens is like they start using these as a way to like they use it as a way basically to provide food and also to
It's propaganda.
teach the Catholics about Protestantism.
Oh, nice. Oh, good. Oh,
Yeah.
good.
So this is what gives rise to the term superism, right? Where these like Protestant Bible groups create systems where it's like you can convert over if you want the soup, you got to convert.
That's so fucked
Yeah.
up.
Yeah. It's fucked. Right?
It's just so, I mean, it's just so messed up. That's so messed up.
And so like the idea of like watching people eat or whatever, like it wasn't always for pay, right? But it's still pretty fucked, right?
It's like a form of propaganda. No matter if you put a religious element into it for like conversion, anyways, you're basically making them into a spectacle, right?
Yeah.
You've created this situation. You're part of the group of people that have created this situation, but you're not you're gonna just look at it. You're not gonna actually actively help it.
Yeah. And so the soup was actually from a chef called Burgoyne, or Soyer as well, right? So it's from an idea that came from basically what was known as like these specific soup kitchens, right? That had existed before. So the Soyer soup contained the following. You ready?
Yes.
Okay. 1/4 of a joint of leg of beef, 2 ounces of dripping fat, 2 onions and other vegetables, 1/2 pound of flour, 1/2 pound of pearl barley, 3 ounces of salt with 1/2 ounce of brown sugar, fuel to like heat it, 2 gallons of water. So the total cost for a thing of soup was 6 pence.
And that's clearly to feed everyone.
Yeah. Yeah. Yes. So the idea was this guy, Burgoyne, was the one that was in charge of actually setting up these soup kitchens. So it's a really interesting, an example of good government policy happening, right? One of the few good government policies. Now, by the summer of 1847, 3 million people are fed by the soup kitchens for a total cost of only 1.75 million pounds. So it's like the most successful thing they've tried, right? The workhouses or the working system, the work jobs, or the outdoor relief jobs haven't worked, right? They're 5 million pounds. It's not feeding the people. They can't buy food. It's just leading to more suffering, right? But the soup kitchen thing does work. Now, like with any good piece of charity, nothing is ever really given for free.
Right.
So the day of the first soup kitchen, when it's opened, they invite like all of the aristocracy from around Ireland and the UK and whatever to come watch the poor people eat the soup. And even people at the time, like reporters are like, this seems kind of fucked up, guys.
Seems kind of messed up.
I don't think we should be watching them eat the soup. Like, Jesus Christ, right? Like it's bad.
Well, it's propaganda, right? I mean, it's
absolute
perfect propaganda. So you can feel good about yourself for helping without actually helping, and you can kind of loathe the thing you're looking at.
Absolutely. And they also do, if you want to come get soup and be fed, you need to convert to Protestantism from Catholicism. And so it actually creates like a slang, or not really a slang, I guess, more like a curse almost, like, oh, you're taking the soup, or you're working for the soup, or whatever, is like you're giving up your faith for this help.
Right.
Yeah.
That's
crazy.
So insidious.
It's absolutely crazy, right? So that's really what's happening here, right? It's never
charitable.
Just help.
Right.
No, it's never just help.
No.
So the Soup Act is useful. It's helpful. It's helping things. It's really helping people. But it has a tremendous amount of opposition to it. So, number one, the Whigs believe the Irish should pay for their own poor. And so the poor laws that are already on the books, those should be the only method of relief for poverty. Right? It's the only way to make sure that the Irish or the local people are the ones paying for the poor in their region, and they're responsible for their own economic activity.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah?
Mm-hmm.
On top of this, the cost to the taxpayers of other parts of the UK, they thought had to be limited. Because they thought the Irish, they brought this on themselves.
Right.
There's a quote from Trevelyan, right? So the owners and holders of land in these districts had permitted or encouraged the growth of the excessive population, which depended upon the precarious potato, and they alone had it in their power to restore society to a safe and healthy state. End quote. If you notice that thing about excessive population, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's a thing that they're obsessed with. This idea that like the Irish, there's too many Irish. They have too many people for the land to handle. Right? This is a big moralist argument that, again, the Irish weren't so damn horny. None of this would have happened in the first place, right? Why can't they
animals, right? They're just animals.
Look, when you're gonna have a kid, right? So a man loves a woman, you close your eyes, you think of the queen. You know what I mean? That's it. You can't enjoy it. No one should be enjoying it. All right.
Well, and you most certainly, during that time, like birth control and Catholicism wasn't that great for anyone, right?
No.
Or really for Protestant. But
no,
it's just the thing that's so amazing, again, is it's just standard playbook still, right? This is how you isolate a group of people and make them into something less than yourself. Because they were probably like, the other thing is that they were playing them against the UK poor. Like, well, we have our own poor people to take care of here. Why should we be spending money to take care of the Irish?
Oh, it is 100% like freckled welfare queens.
Yes.
Right? Like that's the argument here, right?
Yes.
Another argument they use that we hear all the time, why don't you move out of Tornado Alley? Right?
Yes.
The government is like, if things are so bad in Ireland, why
don't you
move?
leave?
Why don't you stop replanting potatoes every season after the blight? Right? The conditions are in place that make it impossible to do anything else.
Right. Well, by saying that too, by putting this all back on Ireland and the Irish people, it excuses them from any kind of culpability, right?
Absolutely.
So it's doing multiple things. It's not just, ignorance. It's like the Whigs have to start to separate themselves, or else it becomes their more, history will show, but it became their problem, right?
Yeah.
So they're basically saying, no, this isn't this is
us. This is the Irish.
It's the Irish.
So, besides like these moral arguments, these kind of like, I guess more social these moralist arguments, there were also like legal challenges to the idea of what was called outdoor relief for the Irish, right? So the poor laws explicitly said only indoor relief can be provided. Yeah.
Yeah.
So any relief given to people who aren't living in the workhouse system, any people who own land or could otherwise work, that was explicitly illegal by the poor laws. And so they argued the Soup Act, it's too close to outdoor relief. There's no way to be sure that these people are telling the truth, that they actually need the soup, right? This could just be a guy coming off, walking around you could just hide his gold chain and, be like, I need the soup. And then you give him soup and then he goes out and buys a cell phone. That's crazy, right? We can't give him soup. There's no way. What are you talking about, right?
Oh, God.
So there's like this crazy infighting amongst the Whig government, right? About whether or not they should be feeding the poor this like floury single cut of beef soup,
Yeah.
And so
they should be doing the bare minimum that could possibly alleviate some of this condition.
Absolutely. Yeah. So they think they're like, listen, we're going to do the soup thing for a little bit, but it's just to get over the winter.
Yeah.
Right. We're not happy about it, but it's just to help the people out until they can get back to the fall of 47.
Yes.
When the next potato harvest comes in, and it should be fine and everything will go back to normal.
Yes. Because if we've learned, it's really good just to ignore any of the root cause problems. It should just solve itself.
And pro tip for listeners, things don't get better. They're about to get way worse. And that's where we'll pick up after the break. Hey, listeners of the Mad Scientist Podcast, Chris here. I'm so happy to say that today's episode is sponsored by Bombas, a company who not only makes wonderfully comfortable clothing, but also does a lot of good in the world. Bombas' mission is simple: make the most comfortable clothes ever and match every item sold with an equal item donated. So when you buy Bombas, you're also giving to someone in need. Bombas designed their socks, shirts, and underwear to be the clothes you can't wait to put on every day. And everything they make is soft, seamless, tagless, and has a cozy feel. And did you know that socks, underwear, and t-shirts are the 3 most requested clothing items at homeless shelters? That's why Bombas donates one for every item you buy. So far, Bombas customers like you have helped donate over 50 million items of essential clothing. Please, if you feel like you need t-shirts, underwear, socks, or just want to order something and do a little bit of good in the world while you're doing it, go to bombas.com/scientist and use code SCIENTIST for 20% off your first purchase. That's BOMBAS.com/scientist and use code SCIENTIST at checkout. Bombas.com/scientist, code SCIENTIST. Now back to the show.
Coming up on 5 Minute News, I'm Anthony Davis. You might think it's partisan because maybe it's critical of one side or the other, but it's not. It's just the truth. And I think that's also something that's kind of unusual for Americans listening to the radio or to podcasts, because the news landscape in the States has been so partisan for so many decades. So 5 Minute News is verified, truthful, independent, unbiased, and essential world news daily.
And we're back, Jake. Okay. So the fall of 1847 brought about the 3rd potato harvest of the famine years. And there was no blight. There's no blight anymore. Things are looking up. Here's the problem. So many people have been starving to death, sick, working on aimless roads to nowhere. There's just not, and there hasn't been enough planting of seed potatoes or of other crops.
They don't have labor. Again, infrastructure, right?
There's no labor.
There's no labor. Your labor's sick or dead or,
Exactly.
indigent or moved, right?
Yeah.
Left.
So there's no, it's almost like, so you got a class of people who are mostly farmers, right?
Yep. And
the government says, well, we don't want to help this class of people anymore. And then when they all leave or don't get help or whatever, and then suddenly all your crops are no longer being gathered. It's like, oh, holy crap. What happened here? Right. It's right. Exactly what happened with Brexit. But anyway,
but it's sort of like your extraction, right? Your extraction economy. This is
an extractive economy.
Your race to the bottom extraction economy. You've just hit it. It's now beginning to affect you.
Yes.
Right. So you've taken out everything.
So besides great. There's no more potato blight. Landlords also now they're expecting back payment of rent, right? Because, hey, potatoes are fine now. You don't need any help anymore. Yeah. Right? Things are back to normal. Get with it, right? The economy's open again, stupid. So any potatoes then that were planted or any crops that were planted were going towards payment of relief provided for the blight years. Yeah. So the Irish landlords now are selling that grain outside of Ireland. And the poor are just too destitute, hungry, sick, ill to do anything to help feed themselves.
Right.
So the UK government, though, doesn't look at this again as this is bad government management. You can't end a crisis just when things start getting back to normal. You have to handle the crisis until the after effects are handled effectively. They don't look at it as a failure of government. They think of this as this is the fault of the greedy landlords and the lazy Irish.
Yep.
And so in October of 1847, the UK government basically codified these views with the Irish Poor Law Relief Extension Act. Now listen, anytime anything is named like that, like, the Democratic People's Republic of North Korea, it's the opposite, right?
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
You don't name something like definitely not a murder basement if it's not a murder basement. So
nothing to see here, murder basement.
yeah, despite its name, it gave no relief to the Irish and in fact made things significantly worse. The crux of the issue, right, is this idea that the Irish should pay for their own poor. So in this law, they set it up so that the poor rate, that the monies that were taxed to pay for the government relief of Ireland, would be levied now directly onto the landlords themselves, and the rate would be increased. So this is what Trevelyan said. So he said, quote, "The principle of the poor law is that rate after rate should be levied for the purpose of preserving life until the landlord and the farmer either enable the people to support themselves by honest industry or dispose of their estates to those who can perform this indispensable duty." End quote. So again, directly saying in a letter, the idea here is to punish the bad capitalists who can't cut it, to give their shit away to people who can.
Right. Yeah, because that's, yeah.
The one good thing the law did, it made outdoor relief available to a larger class of people. So it gave help to people who couldn't work, orphans, mothers with children, right? Like it opened up some stuff to people. It also made outdoor relief available if the workhouse was too full, was too filled with illness, right? Because again, people just dying in the workhouse, or like some other reason that the workhouse system was not workable at the time. But most infamously, it's known for codifying what became known as the Gregory Clause. The clause was put forward by Sir William Gregory, a member of Parliament from Dublin. Now, it tried to solve two problems. First, how do we provide relief in a way that ensures only those who actually need it get the help? And two, how do we push Ireland back into a situation where that excess population is no longer a thing? How do we get to a point where the Irish land is able to actually support the Irish people? So two, like, again, super villain level evil things that we still do to this day in most Western governments.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like, this happens all the time.
Yep.
Right?
Yep.
So the Gregory Clause attempts to solve these issues in pretty terrible ways. So first, anyone asking for relief, again, outdoor relief or indoor relief, who has more than a quarter acre of land, forfeits that land to the landlord or government. Any fee incurred by the government then to feed tenant farmers and the destitute would be collected by the poor law unions directly from that landlord. If that person still technically lives on the landlord's estate.
Right.
So you're poor, you can't feed yourself or your family. You go there and say, listen, I live on, I don't know,
plot of land, or this quarter acre of a plot of land. They take it and then they're going to charge that landlord.
Exactly.
But the landlord in turn is going to squeeze the people they're still there.
Well, here's the thing. The government, the landlords are at their breaking point now.
Yes.
They haven't made any money for like 3 years. And in fact, they're shelling out tremendous amounts of money to help pay, right, for the poor. So the government has to start sending in like soldiers and forcing compliance. And so the landlords figure, okay, the only way to get around this then, if the people no longer live on my land, then I don't have to pay for their relief. Right? They'll just be homeless. And that's the government's problem, not my problem. So the landlords start evicting people en masse. So basically, like, people go to the workhouse or these outdoor relief places to get help. They come back to their farms burnt to the ground by the landlords, or like the landlords send in goons in the night to like force you out of your home.
Yes. Oh my God.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So good government policy.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Really good government policy.
Well, effective, right? I mean, that's the thing. Is it's like this is what human nature does when it's left unchecked with a problem.
Yes. So the second method was provide help in the way of incentivizing Irish immigration to other places. All right.
Yeah.
So
you just bus them to Martha's Vineyard.
So this was I'm sorry. This was a quote from Oliver Burke in the Dublin University magazine in August of 1876 about the Gregory Clause, and basically how, like, man, that guy thought he was helping, but he made it way worse. The quote: Mr. Gregory was amongst those who devoted their thoughts to these twofold difficulties. As to the latter, meaning Irish overpopulation, he proposed to the House that any tenant rated at a net value not exceeding £5 should be assisted to immigrate by the guardians of the Union, the landlord to forego any claim for rent, and to provide such fair and reasonable sum as might be necessary for the immigration of such occupier, the guardians being empowered to pay for the immigration of his family, any sum not exceeding half what the landlord should give, the same to be levied off the rates. So basically they said, well, listen, if you don't want to pay the rate anymore, you can just pay them to move.
Yeah.
And then and that's fine. You pay them to move, and then you don't owe any more for the relief.
Of course, you have nowhere to go.
Well, here's the thing, right? This method creates further problems. Yeah. So first off, like, we're talking about the Irish famine as if this famine did not affect the rest of Europe. The rest of Europe was getting kicked to the nads too.
Right.
Like, there wasn't a lot of food anywhere. And so part of, like, the geopolitical thing that's happening here is that countries like America that have plenty of grain to ship around, they are basically selling to the highest bidder. Yeah.
Yes.
And so the British government is not willing to pay any more to feed the Irish. Right? They don't want to help them.
No.
So they're like,
it's counterproductive for them.
Exactly. Yeah. So there's just no there's no reason to do it, right? So they're just like, whatever, we'll just send them off to these other places and not worry about it anymore. Yeah. Yes. Now, this creates, again, further tensions though, right? So, and then that's another thing here we didn't mention. At the time of, like, 1847, the British economy almost collapses. Because, again, there's just so much of this going around, and the people, of course, in power, who do they blame? The lazy Irish who are causing all this burden on their economy. Right? So that kind of further inflames the people against the British people against the Irish. Right?
Yeah.
So, okay, they're now sending the Irish to, like, Liverpool, these like places in the UK to then hopefully continue their journey to the Americas or other European port cities. The problem is that a lot of the times these landlords are just tricking them into going to Liverpool and then not helping them get any further.
Well, yeah, I would assume that would be standard at this point.
Or there's people in those other ports who are like, oh, if you give me the money they gave you,
I'll
we can
get
give you
there.
food and help and we'll get you there, right? And then they never see them again. So this law, the Irish Poor Law Extension Act, and the Gregory Clause basically create the conditions from which the rest of Irish history began and, in my opinion, should be viewed. At this point, the people who are subsisting off of government relief were essentially just prolonging starvation and death. And now, with the Irish unable to provide the relief for their own people, the British government completely refuses to step in any further. And this leads to further acts of rebellion, with Irish poor rising up in pockets against the gentry and the landlords. Obviously, the group most hated are the landlords, those who are evicting tenants, in giant groups, right, or sending them off to the Americas. And actually, it's recorded that the first landlord killed in this way was Dennis Mahan of County Roscommon. He owned a 9,000-acre plot that had 28 villages on it called Strokestown. He sent his unwanted tenants to Quebec and had, at the time of his death, sent over 800 tenants from the estate. The 3,000 remaining tenants, he was looking to evict all of them. Right? He had evicted them.
Right.
That included 84 widows, children, orphans, right? Everything. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so he's ambushed on the road one night and shot. And supposedly the people celebrated his death by lighting bonfires throughout his estate. And I get it. I fucking get it. You know?
Yeah. Yeah,
So-
man. Because the thing that this example, I think, illustrates to me again is just the size, like 28 villages. You know, he's like, this wasn't just a couple, 50 people or 60 people. This was
No.
like, this landlord almost was a monarch unto himself to these people in some ways. You know, he represented he represented them in their future.
Yeah. It's like if, yeah, there's just
It's like
no,
if the mayor of your town evicted you.
yeah, there's no, exactly. There's no comparison to it in the modern day.
No, but it would be it's that closely tied. And it's like, he over 800 people had to evacuate. I mean, that's a massive amount. And then the people that were left, that were too weak or too old or too young to do that were just evicted. Like, I'm surprised this guy didn't get it sooner.
It's crazy. So, so the poor are rising up now. And honestly, the landlords are kind of like, yeah, let's get them. Right? Like, yeah, it's bad. Shit's bad. Let's get them. Let's do it. And so rebellion plans start springing up around the country. Now, nothing ever really comes from it, right? The most successful group are the Young Irish, or the Young Ireland Party. But they really don't have their day until they become the Irish Confederation, who are arguing against the repeal or arguing for the repeal of the Acts of Union and the creation of an Irish Free State, which, yeah, pretty good fucking idea, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Hard not to listen to or read this stuff and be like, they should have stayed with the UK. They clearly cared about them so much. But again, like, these rumors of rebellion start coming up, and it just turns British sentiment against the Irish even further. And so the Times of London quotes, "In no other country have men talked treason until they are hoarse, and then gone about begging sympathy from their oppressors. And in none have they repeated more humble and piteous requests for help to those whom they have previously repaid with monstrous ingratitude." End quote.
Yeah, this is, basically the fuse is lit on all of this stuff.
Yeah, stuff's about to go down.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
tensions are increasing. It's like powder keg. Things are going crazy. The British don't know what to do. They don't know how to handle this problem. And so they decide, okay, here's what we're going to do. Step one, we're going to let the people starve. And step two, we're going to send in more troops and we're going to rescind the right of habeas corpus until 1849.
So they're going to occupy.
There's actually a quote from I think he's a reverend who basically says, if only the government sent bread instead of guns.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's crazy. So horrifically, the crop of 48 sees the complete failure of the potato crop again due to blight. And this time the government just literally throws up their hands. Like, we're not helping anymore. And part of the reason is because the British government, like idiots, but again, not too unlike a lot of companies today with the COVID pandemic, they bet that grain prices would forever stay at market highs because the market never corrects itself due to geopolitical situations. And so their economy was really starting to get hit pretty badly. And so Russell says in a letter, quote, "We have subscribed, worked, visited, clothed for the Irish millions of money, years of debate, etc., etc., etc. The only return is rebellion and calumny. Let us not grant, lend, clothe, etc. anymore, and see what they will do." It's bad.
Dude,
it's rough.
That's just not, yeah. Yeah. I mean, what they'll do is, again, it is just a powder keg. You're seeing that. You're seeing the outlines of what's going to affect, still have an effect on both of the countries today.
And so at this point now, you basically have a regular, like, it's just a breaking down further of the landlords and the poor, So any landlords who had stayed their hand for that first winter, right? Because not every landlord evicted their people or, sent them to other countries without a hope for any kind of help or anything. A lot of them tried to stay as long as they could. Again, the landlords are not good. They're not heroes in this story by any stretch of the imagination. But at this point, they're starting to get some of their own medicine.
Yeah, and they're stuck there, right? They can't really just abandon ship. Some of them probably did, like you were saying, but
yeah,
they're rooted there.
And so they now turn to another wave of mass evictions or mass immigration to other countries. They have nothing else they can really do. To them, paying for them to go to other locations is the charitable almost solution. Yeah. Now we talk about this like the problems ended when they got on the ship. It didn't. The ships were horrible.
Yeah.
There was rampant disease, starvation, suffering. A lot of cities had to quarantine boats from Ireland for weeks before allowing them on land, just leading to like 90% casualty rates, right? It's just horrific what happens. And then the Irish come to these countries and find out, oh shit, they don't like us as much as the British didn't like us.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
We think today of the Irish as being like, almost like in your head, if you think of like, what a white person looks like, you kind of think of like a pale skinned person, right? Or you think of, I think like a lot of people think like Irish Americans or whatever, right? When we think of what a white American is, that wasn't the case then, right? The Irish were a minority group who came here and we did not like them just as much as the British didn't like them.
Right. Well, they were, they didn't have, they didn't speak the language. They didn't know the customs necessarily. Yes. They were outsiders, continuous outsiders without, and you're going to have the same sort of xenophobic reaction the majority of the time when that happens.
Yeah. It's just, this becomes the recurring kind of theme here. So the famine continues until 1850. But the stage for what comes next is already set. The government now has stopped trying to help the people. They're now trying to grind the Irish population into the ground with punishments. Right? First punishing them for the inability to feed their own people, then punishing them for their rebelliousness after the government actively tries to harm them. And so as more and more landlords no longer are able to handle the debt burden for this relief, more evictions, more immigration, more deaths happen. The crops of 1849 fail, and this creates what's known as the Encumbered Estates Act. This basically lets any debt-laden land can be auctioned off to pay creditors back for debts incurred during the famine.
Oh my God.
So again, even the landlords now are getting all their stuff taken.
Yeah, it's a further consolidation of wealth, right?
Yes.
It's all going back up to the UK.
So by 1850, the agricultural conditions return to normal. The potato crop is back to normal. There's enough potatoes, and the population is decreased like crazy. But the Irish would not forget the horrors of the famine, would not forget the evils of the government who had made things worse basically at every turn. And particularly in America, anti-British sentiment and the call for a free Ireland is growing every single year.
Yeah.
The call is helped by newfound members of the Young Irelanders and Irish Confederation. So this quote from John Mitchell says, quote, "The English indeed call that famine a dispensation of providence and ascribe it entirely to the blight of the potatoes. But potatoes failed in like manner all over Europe. Yet there was no famine save in Ireland. The British account of the matter, then, is first a fraud, second a blasphemy. The Almighty indeed sent the potato blight, but the English created the famine." All told, the Irish famine kills almost 1 million people, with another 2 million leaving Ireland. It is, I don't think you can look at it as anything else than a mass. It begins as bad management. It ends as a genocide.
Yes.
Like, I don't think you can mince words about it. Like
No, you can't.
It's terrible. It's horrible.
It is. And I think the thing that, again, you end on this, or, again, it doesn't really end, but you get this toll, but you also are setting the stage for rebellion for the next 100+ years, right? There won't be any kind of stable relation ongoing or civil discourse for a very long period of time. But
no, how can you have discourse with, like, the thing is that after, like, things look bad at first. The fact that, like, Trevelyan and, like, Russell and any of these Whigs weren't like, yo, before I die, let's burn all my letters so that nobody knows what a tremendous piece of shit I am.
Well, but that's the beautiful thing about these people, is they don't think that they're wrong. They don't think of themselves as pieces of shit, right? They're just like, they would say the same thing again, given the exact same circumstance. And that's the thing, I think, that, even Margaret Thatcher, when she was in office as the prime minister, when they were having the hunger strikes, the Irish hunger strikes, basically her stance was, let them starve. Let them starve. If that's what they're going to do, let them starve. Right. So it's the same sort of attitude that prevailed even then. It's like it's a moral inferiority, and that is the only way to solve that is basically to let them bring themselves to ruin, instead of acknowledging the huge role and what they did to this group of people. Right. Because then there would have to be a level of accountability that I don't see monarchies or ruling class governments, are United States included, wanting to be able to open their eyes to, because it's a pretty big reckoning. Right. I mean, it's not like what the Irish, went through is dissimilar to Native Americans, African Americans.
Well, you know what, Trevelyan?
A lot of groups got on that end of it.
You know what Trevelyan did after the Irish famine?
He went to work for a lobbyist.
He got sent to rule the economy of India.
Of course well, that's perfect. That's perfect for him, right? So, I mean, that's spot on the nose, right? He fails upwards.
It's crazy. It's crazy.
I know, but the one thing, maybe not the one thing, but one of the big things that, like, I take away from this and doing the research and going and looking, at Irish culture and art after the famine is, again, the resiliency and the fact that,
oh my God,
that yes. the rebellion is part of, the rebellion becomes part of, almost like a cultural touchstone in a lot of ways. And the point of saying that they're still here after all of this, after everything that happened, the Irish are still, they're still here, and they're still fighting for, Ireland united. To me, that's like the one of the main takeaways from something like that, and rebuilding a culture, rebuilding a language, heritage, through education, through song, through stories. It's something that Trevelyan was not able to stamp out.
It honestly, yeah, it just makes you so, I'm not even Irish, and I am proud of the Irish. You know what I mean? Through this story. Like, it's like such a victory. Is it a victory?
Well, I think it is. It's, again, it's sort of, I keep using the phrase cold comfort, but it is such a thorn in the side of sort of this way of thinking that, that enabled Trevelyan and enabled the Whigs to dehumanize these people. Right. It's such a like rebuttal, almost like just, again, it's hope, and I think that's what they couldn't kill in a lot of ways.
And I'll tell you, the first thing I did after finishing the research for this series was buy like every book I could on the Irish Rebellion.
Which is fascinating.
I mean,
The Irish Rebellion is
like,
pretty fascinating too.
Pretty crazy. Dear listeners, this was a very, very long series with a lot of sources, with a lot of research. I've been researching, like, I probably brought this idea for this series to you, Marie, like a year ago,
Yes.
maybe. And like, I had already read a book and was like, we should do this. I think it'd be really cool. If you liked the series, you know, give us a good review, like us on Facebook, follow the page on YouTube, you know, tell your friends, listen to the show, and please, let's fucking
Please
down
learn
with the
from
monarchy.
history. Help us all learn from history.
Help us all learn from history.
Just that little
please.
bit, right? Just that tiny little bit. It's going to help.
Please. All right. We're also going back to a thing we used to do where the research for full episodes is getting pretty intense. So every other week we're going to do like an interview or like a fun episode or whatever. So hope you enjoy that. And as always, reach out to us anytime. We love you, listeners. Thank you again, dear listeners, for listening to the Mad Scientist podcast. I have been your host, Chris Cogswell, joined by my co-host,
Marie Mayhew.
If you'd like to contact the show, please send us an email at themadscientistpodcast@gmail.com. That's all one word. You can also follow us on Twitter at MadScientistPod or at Team Giant Squid for Marie. And of course, you can see us on Facebook, on Instagram, and all over the internet as the Mad Scientist Podcast. And again, our logo is the one with the pumpkin head, so it's easy to see.
Mm-hmm.
If you've enjoyed the show tonight, please consider supporting us on Patreon, where the money that you give to us will help us to promote this show further, to make it better, and just to spend more time making it.
Because we love doing that.
We do love doing that. Our logo was designed by Carrie Shaheen. Our web design is done by Desdemona Howard.
Woohoo!
And our sound design is done by Jake Cardinal. Thanks again for listening.
Thank you. This has been a Damn It Chippy production.
Coming up on 5 Minute News, I'm Anthony Davis. You might think it's partisan because maybe it's critical of one side or the other, but it's not, it's just the truth. And I think that's also something that's kind of unusual for Americans listening to the radio or to podcasts, because the news landscape in the States has been so partisan for so many decades. So 5 Minute News is verified, truthful, independent, unbiased, and essential world news daily.